Welcome back. The Ochsner Precision Cancer Therapies program offers the region access to the latest in cancer therapeutics, research, and advanced diagnostics for early phase trial cancer patients. Joining us now with more about clinical trials, both fact and fiction, is Medical Director of Ochsner Precision Therapies program, Marc Matrana. Marc, thanks for joining us on Great Day.
Great, thank you for having me.
Okay, so we're going to expel a few myths this morning, right?
That's right.
Okay, so myth number one, clinical trials are only for patients who have exhausted all other options.
We hear this all the time. People think that clinical trials are for patients who have no other hope.
Sure.
And in fact, clinical trials can offer great new hope for patients who have exhausted all standard options. But more and more, we're actually doing clinical trials with patients who have been newly diagnosed with cancer or who are earlier in their cancer journey. We're using precision medicine techniques, for example, new technologies around genetics, genomics, proteomics, and other technologies to better pair patients earlier on with the very best, safest therapies with the least side effects.
Okay, so moving on to myth number two, clinical trials are expensive.
Well, that's true. They are expensive for drug companies and for hospitals, but we never pass those costs along to patients. In fact, in Louisiana, we have a law, for example, that a cancer patient who's on a clinical trial has certain protections with their insurance company, for example. Certain things can't be denied anymore, and so on and so forth. Yeah, it's great. And so for these patients, actually, financially, they're not taking on any burden of the trial. And in fact, we go out of our way to offer transportation assistance and other assistance for patients who want to participate on clinical trials, but maybe live a little further out or have some financial hardships.
So you're trying to make it a little bit easier.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, myth number three, clinical trials are dangerous.
Yes, we hear this often, and there's no doubt that any medical treatment carries certain risks. Clinical trials may carry a little bit more risk because often we're using drugs that we haven't studied extensively. We're still learning about them. But we mitigate that risk in many ways. One of the ways is that we monitor patients who are on clinical trials much more closely than we would patients who are not on clinical trials or who are receiving a standard therapy. And in fact, all of the clinical trials that are done at Ochsner and any large hospital system around the country have to be done in accordance with the Institutional Review Board. At Ochsner, we have an Institutional Review Board, for example, made up of doctors and nurses, community members, even clergy who oversee the clinical trials and make sure that we are conducting them within the bounds of ethics and always keeping patient safety at the forefront of what we do.
So I was going to say, when you monitor these patients more closely, I mean, because of the clinical trials, would it be possible to catch something that your doctors may not otherwise have seen?
Absolutely, absolutely. So each of our clinical trials patients, for example, is assigned a clinical trials nurse who follows up with that patient above and beyond the usual visits, the usual clinic visits. They're often seen in the clinic more often. They get more frequent blood tests or scans, and so often we're able to pick up problems that our clinical trials patients are having earlier than we would in a patient not enrolled in a clinical trial.
All right, so our last myth here, myth number four, clinical trials may give me a placebo or no therapy at all.
This is one of the biggest myths we hear. Patients are afraid that they're not going to receive treatment on a trial. Nothing could be further from the truth. I tell patients that I wake up each morning because I want to fight cancer. I want to do what's best for each of my patients. And so we would never withhold therapy for a patient on a trial. Now, when we do use placebos, the way we typically use them is in such a fashion that everyone on the trial gets a standard therapy and that some of the patients get an extra therapy, an experimental drug on top of the standard therapy. But we would never withhold a drug from a patient or a treatment from a patient. It would be completely unethical and totally against what
these are people, not lab rats, is what I'm hearing, right?
That's exactly right. These are people, and we want to do the very best thing for them. And we know that in clinical trials in general, patients who are enrolled in clinical trials tend to do a little better than patients who aren't because they're often getting the latest, greatest therapies. And so we're actually able to offer therapies to these patients sometimes years before these drugs become available or FDA approved off trial. And so in that way, we're improving outcomes for many of our patients.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And also,
Yeah.
there's an event that's coming up, right? That you can give back and
There
help
is.
support cancer
There
patients.
is.
Right?
As we mentioned before, clinical trial work is expensive, and it's not something that we can do on our own. It really takes the support of the community to keep our program running. And each year, we sponsor, along with Gail Benson, a wonderful gala called Moonlight of Miracles. It takes place on the floor of the Superdome. And this year, the Moonlight of Miracles gala is happening on November 8th, Friday, November 8th, and we would love to have community members come out and support the innovative things we do. The money we raise goes to fund clinical research, but also patient support, helping patients who need transportation support or other financial assistance.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so
Great.
much for the information.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
All right, well, to learn more, you can head to ochsner.org/earlyphase, call toll free at 1-888-995-7405, or visit 1514 Jefferson Highway in New Orleans.